So,
Hey everybody, this is Michael Colomb.
and this is Andrew Giarusso.
And hey, you're hanging with Mike and Andy. Okay, hey Andy, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing really, really good. So I'm excited because now we're after it's after Thanksgiving, and we have full bellies, and we're back on the air, and we're doing cool things.
Yeah, I
And
know it's very exciting.
Well, I know we have a cool guest today.
Yeah, we do. I'm very excited to talk to.
Yeah, because he did a documentary called The Acid. Jesus Christ.
Yes, the Acid King.
Thank you. I wanted to say the Acid Queen because I did Tommy the musical when I was in college.
Oh, awesome!
Tina Turner to the Acid Queen, so I can never get that out of my head. It's one of my best things, so I apologize.
No, and I honestly, we'll get into this further during the show, but I honestly think that there might be some connection there. A lot of people always assume like, oh, it must have been like a Lizard King thing, but I know this guy was into the Who, so I'm wondering if he did like a gender flip from Tommy there. So,
oh, see, maybe that's why I thought that.
Could be.
Anyways, let me introduce you to Jesse Pollack.
Howdy, everybody.
Nice little segue there. How are you doing, my friend?
Jesse?
I'm doing all right. How about you guys?
We're good. Thank you for hanging with us today.
No. When they sent me over, they're like, "Hey, you want to do Hanging with Mike and Andy?" I was like, "Yeah, let me check out their show." And I watched some of your stuff on YouTube, and I was like, "This seems fun. Yeah, let's do this."
Yeah, totally. It's a super laid back show.
We're
just here. We're just here to hang out, shoot the shit.
We're kind of goofy. That's probably why.
I have a podcast where we're the same way, and we're probably a little less professional than you guys. We like to talk about dumb conspiracy theories and UFO sightings, so we just make like dick jokes about aliens and Bigfoot all day. So
you can, well, that's good. You can talk about anything you want. We'll do dick jokes all day.
Yes, let's just forget talking about the movie. I'm so sick of this shit. What do you guys think of the Patterson Gimlin Bigfoot film? That's what people really want to know.
Yeah,
Bigfoot is like a huge thing, isn't it?
Because
there's Bigfoot conventions, right?
So they tell me. I don't know if I would ever go to one. I don't know if there's like enough right guard in the world to convince me to go to a Bigfoot convention. But oh man, I'm gonna get fucking some Bigfoot death threats from people pretty soon. Like the whole cast of Finding Bigfoot's gonna come for me now.
No. Well, as long as you listen to our show first and go check out your movie, it'll be fine.
Oh, that's great. A little bit of controversy. It'll get the buzz going. The algorithm will pick it up.
There you go. Gotta have a little controversy. Come on.
You need to, and there's no shortage of it. In this story, like this was one of the big early satanic panic cases that everybody went crazy with, and it's almost like this. It's almost like a joke trying to explain it to people, but it was like a very serious thing. Like you try telling people like, oh yeah, well this story broke because he was wearing an AC/DC shirt and that scared a lot of people. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm like, no, in 1984, AC/DC scared people. And they're like, the band that was talking about fucking fat chicks and saluting those who are about to rock. And it's like, yeah, no, those dudes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it.
I'm sorry. It's just crazy how they, put certain things like that on like music and certain bands. And it's like, these are just looks that they're doing. They're trying to change the game a little bit. And, the whole satanic thing is so funny to me.
Well, remember, they've always kind of lumped it back and, like going all the way back to the 30s with Robert Johnson. And, he sold his soul to the devil to be that good when it was actually just like, people making that shit up out of like low-key racism, I think. But it's been going, and if you want to get into like the societal aspect of it, I mean, you could go all the way back to the Salem witch trials. So there's always been an other in pop culture or religion, societal construct. It's just this one ended up being especially goofy, but for some reason a lot of people bought into it. Like we go into it in the film. In the 80s, there was this whole like pseudo criminalization of youth. Like parents were ready to think their teenagers were murderers at the time, which I don't know why they didn't look more inward. It's just like, well, if your kid's a murderer, you might have something to do with that, but I don't know. The 80s were weird, man.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, talking about the 80s, it's like with AC/DC, I mean, we're talking about a time when like Madonna was a very aggressive, oversexual, a woman who was like very comfortable with her sexuality and her body, and people were like up in arms about that. She had her book Sex come out, and it was like, now you do that. I mean, look at what you see on television. It's like, it's so normal, right?
Oh yeah, who gives a shit now?
Especially with things like in the age of TikTok, but that in the 80s, that was the thing, is like everything was just so taboo, you couldn't talk about it. So having something dealing with like even say satanic and Satanism, people are like fucking mind blown. Yeah, I remember I was.
Well, in the 80s, like there was this thing where they like, I don't want to politicize it too much, but it was the conservative Reagan 80s, and there was this thing where people sort of wanted to make America like a puritanical society. And so you had things like that, like no sexualization of women celebrities and any sort of rock and roll that was vaguely annoying to people. They found, well, let's find a way to make it, we'll tell people it's satanic, it's the devil, and all that stuff. And we're even seeing it now with that that concert tragedy that happened. What was it, last month or earlier this month? They're out there. And the biggest irony of it is, didn't like fucking Ace Frehley from Kiss just make the news by saying, oh yeah, no, it was a mass satanic ritual? And I'm like, dude, they were calling you guys knights in Satan's service like 30 years ago. Now you jump on their boat. Like, it never goes away. Like, people can look at the film and read the book and go, wow, what a strange time. I'm glad we've moved past that, but we really haven't. If anything, we're diving further into it now, especially with like QAnon shit and all of that. So it's, I don't know. I mean, it's fun to laugh at, but it is kind of scary too.
I mean, it's beyond scary, I think. Especially with how easily it's like, you don't even have to prove it. It seemed like you just have to, like, okay, let's think about all these people that are in Dallas right now waiting for dead politicians to come back to life. Like that, there's that weird, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there's that thing. It's like, I think any normal I don't want to say those kind of things, but like any other person would be like, he's clearly not going to come back, but they just want to believe that so badly, and there's no proof of it. They are just spreading this sort of thing, and it's interesting how 30 years later we're still like in this mindset of like how people can just believe something like that and run with it.
I blame the internet for it mostly, and like all the stuff in Dealey Plaza and all that. It is kind of fitting because, like, I don't know, it pisses me off because like when I was in high school, being into conspiracy theories and shit was kind of cool. Like, I loved reading spooky books about like the Kennedy assassination and like the Roswell cover up. I thought that stuff was really interesting. And then once social media and YouTube became like the law of society, it all got hijacked by like, and not that there weren't nutcases in the subculture before, but it certainly wasn't like the cool Leonard Nimoy In Search Of anymore. It went full on History Channel. The pyramids were built by space Nazis who live on the far side of the moon shit. And it's just like, I don't know. It's like dangerous for society, but it's also like, now I like hesitate to tell people like, oh yeah, I was super into Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories, because they might think I'm like an Alex Jones type or something like that.
Yeah. But I think there's a thin line between being interested in it and being like, it just literally controls your life and the way you do things, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a difference between, like I said, watching, something like The Men Who Killed Kennedy, the documentary from 1988, which they used to show every year on A&E and the History Channel, to being like a full-on asshole like Alex Jones, like, school shootings aren't real, buy my energy supplement. And it's like,
that's a great impression, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, I hate watch the guy because he's such a dickbag. It's like, and that's the funny thing too, when you look at the followers, and it's like you're buying weight loss pills from a guy with a 50-pound head. Like, at some point you have to like ask yourself, like, am I being conned here by this this fucking weirdo with the. It's so funny too because he's clearly trying to have like the Hitler Youth haircut, but he's been going bald for 10 years, so it isn't working on any front. So he had to grow the pathetic beard, and it's I hate him. I hate him. He ruined everything fun about conspiracy theories like that.
And that,
really
I want to say this. Like I know, recently he's been in a lot of trouble about all of his talking about the Sandy Hook shooting and like how he was trying to convince people it wasn't real. And I can't believe that there's people that aren't like, wow, people lost their lives, kids lost their lives, and families are suffering. But no, it's not. Like, let's not worry about that. Oh my God, maybe it's like I don't understand where you get to a point where like, yeah, maybe it's not real. And like
that's so happy he lost his kids over that shit because that used to be like the line you didn't cross with goofy internet shit. It was just like, come on, don't bring kids into it. But he went full on. Those kids are not dead. They flew them to Panama and they're having a good time. They're on a farm with other crisis actors upstate. And it's just like, I am so happy you live in a fucking motel now or it's somewhere outside and you're losing all your money. Like my co-director on this film, Dan Jones, he's my co-host on podcast 1289. And he's got like a running bet in the group chat with all of the other, guests and co-hosts on the show. And he's just like, every time Alex Jones hits the news, he's just like, okay, 6-month odds, Alex Jones suicides by cop. And I'm just like, I'll give it end of the decade. I'm not that optimistic. Too much money at stake for him to kill himself.
Yeah, it'll probably come soon.
I hope so, but I don't know. He might find another energy supplement or something to sell people. So,
well, he's definitely raising money now.
Yeah. So he's subpoenaed, isn't he, to go before like the January 6th commission or some shit like that? Him and Roger Stone.
Oh yeah, that just got I
think he is.
Yeah.
You think he's gonna go, or you think he's gonna do the Steve Bannon thing?
I definitely think they're all going to do the Steve Bannon thing.
Oh, cool! That means they'll get arrested. Excellent.
I mean, don't you think? I mean, they've already been doing it, so why break form now, right?
I would just like to see him just become like a total coward, and he honestly should at this point because there was already that leak of that footage from that documentary shoot where I guess he thought that they weren't filming or that, the cameraman wasn't going to leak it, but he's just like, I fucking hate Donald Trump. I wish I never met him. I'm so tired of having to lick that guy's balls. And it's he's just in it for the money. But of course, and of course there was that deposition he gave in that one civil trial where he was just like, I just do this for entertainment. No one should ever take me seriously. And it's like, well, you go for strike 3 and just be like, okay, I'm going to sell out and talk to Congress,
But here's the thing. He says no one should take me seriously, but they do. And then he still does it anyways because he knows that those people aren't going to watch his deposition. And there's no accountability for that. That frustrates me.
No, and if they see it, quoted in an article or something, that they just get to cry fake news at everything. And that was the biggest cross I had to bear writing the book and then eventually co-directing the documentary, because a big part of this story, because we don't just do like an A to Z telling of the murder, a big part of the Ricky Kasso story was how the press latched onto it and turned it into the story of a teenage Satan cult in Northport, and that there were supposedly 100 chanting kids in black robes in front of a roaring bonfire as Gary Lauwers was stabbed to death. And of course it was all bullshit, but right as I got the deal from Simon & Schuster to write that book, Trump got elected and immediately ran into that whole fake news bullshit. And here I was writing a book that was decrying the world press for this story. And I was just like, this is a really bad time to be a guy that says fake news and isn't like calling for like an ethno state or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I had to be very careful with how I was pointing my fingers at the press, because I didn't want people to think that I was an Alex Jones type that didn't believe school shootings were real or something like that. It sucks to be critical of the press in a time like that.
Well, I had studied journalism for a little bit in college, and I think the difference between people like Alex Jones and the news is that as a journalist, you kind of show both sides, right? So you want to get both opinions and let people make their own. You're just kind of like, hey, this happened. Like, it's like, whereas people like Alex Jones, it's like they're just perpetuating like something that they feel, it's like a narrative, right? So, and that's what's interesting, I think, about a documentary is because, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's because you can actually show those things and have people interviewed and then show the facts and kind of let people see how it, you know what I'm saying, the difference?
Yeah, and I'll just jump into this story, this like short story, real quick, and then I'm going to hand it over to Andy because there's a little bit of a delay from us going over Zoom, and I keep cutting him off by accident. But a really good example of that was when I was working on the book. I set my Google News alerts for every time Kasso was mentioned, just so I could get more information and stuff. And, you know, no surprise to people that are familiar with the story, it was mostly like heavy metal and horror websites that would like do like an anniversary article about the case. And, you know, by and large, like the big things in the story were incorrectly reported. And it wasn't just like the satanic cult bullshit, even though that was a big factor of it, but even things like, spoiler alert for this easily Googled thing, but Ricky Kasso committed suicide in jail right after he was arrested for the murder of Gary Lauwers. And like I mentioned earlier, he was arrested in the AC/DC shirt, and that iconic photo of him was taken. But he pulled an Epstein in a jail cell and, you know, hanged himself with a bed sheet. And this one guy, I'm not going to name him because I don't want anyone to go out and buy his book because he was a douchebag to me. This guy who writes for a heavy metal and a horror movie site, he wrote an article about Kasso for Investigation Discovery. I think it's like a guest writer or something. And he was talking about, and Kasso famously hanged himself crafting a noose from his AC/DC shirt. And I emailed the guy and I was like, hey, I don't know if you can edit your article or not after it's been submitted, but he didn't hang himself with the AC/DC shirt. It was a bed sheet. And I sent him the death report to show him. I'm like, you know, I'm not just talking out of my ass here. I'm the guy writing the book on the story. And here's, you know, the citation if you want to put it in your article. And instead of changing it to that, he edited to say, Kasso allegedly hanged himself with an AC/DC shirt. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? I just proved to you that that's not the case. But he couldn't let that, oh, but it sounds so cool and spooky if I say he killed himself with the iconic AC/DC shirt. And now he's got a book out about like heavy metal and horror movies. And I'm like, I wouldn't trust anything this dude, you know, says. So that's kind of like what I was up against with this stuff. Other people, I would message them on Twitter and say like, hey, there's this very serious detail that's wrong in this article, you know, like getting the murder victim's name wrong in some cases. And it was always like passive aggressive shit back to me, just like, oh, well, I don't even write to them anymore. You're going to have to write to the editor. So I was just like, oh man, I'm really climbing a mountain of misinformation here that's still going on almost half a century later. So I'm going to have to make sure that I get it right in the book and then eventually in the documentary, because people are just going to keep writing bullshit about it for decades to come. It's the fake story in this case is too good of a story for some people to let go of.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, it really is. It's interesting that like how many times someone has tried to explain this story about Ricky Kasso and how it just keeps getting changed and changed. You know, it's kind of like a game of telephone where people are just kind of finding these points and they're either making them up or they hearsay and put it out there when it's really not the truth. You know, it's the same thing with the press, what the whole news was doing and putting out these fake stories, you know, because unfortunately, if the real story came out, you know, white kid stabbed another kid, buried him in the bush, in the woods, like it probably wouldn't make the news. So they have to spicing it up a little bit. But for how long it's been and how long it's taken, it's amazing how there's so many different stories and how many, you know, differences there really are and what the truth is. So that's what I was going to ask you is when you wrote the book, is that kind of a reason why you wanted to make the documentary, is to kind of explain yourself more or show? Or
it was a really weird thing that happened. If you're lucky enough to get a book deal with one of the bigger publishers like Simon and Schuster or Random House or Penguin, etc., they'll make an announcement about it in the publishing industry trade papers like Publishers Marketplace, Publishers Weekly, etc. And when I signed the deal for The Acid, came back in 2015, it made one of those publications. I can't remember which one, but it said something like, Jesse P. Pollack, author of Death on the Devil's Teeth, signs deal with Simon and Schuster for retelling of the Ricky Kasso satanic murder case. And like only a few months later, I got contacted by, again, I won't name this person because, not trying to start too much drama or get too many people to support their work. But a documentarian who I respected at the time reached out to me and was like, "Oh man, you're doing the Ricky Kasso story. I love it. I've been obsessed with this case for a long time. I think this would make a really great docuseries for A&E or Netflix." And I was like, cool. Like even before I was a professional writer, I would watch this dude's work. Like when I was in college, just chilling out, I was like, I love this documentary he made. And so I said, sure, let's work on it. And so we got to work right away on a pitch book, basically like a big ass PDF file that you present to networks to try to get them interested in buying, the project.
Yeah.
And we worked on it for several weeks, going back and forth through Google Docs. And I noticed every time he would write about Ricky, he would put in leader of the Knights of the Black Circle Satan cult. And I would go in and edit that out because it's not true. And the Knights of the Black Circle weren't even a cult. They were a gang of teenage pot dealers. Yeah. And he would come back to me in an email and go, "You can't do that." And I'm like, "What do you mean I can't do that?" And he's like, "Well, you can't erase the references to Ricky being a cult leader." And I'm like, "But dude, it's not true." And he goes, "Well, I know it's not true, but listen, Jesse, we really have to get people interested in this. We have to get producers that are willing to buy the project and network executives to be 100% behind it so it'll get seen. And once we get picked up, we'll tell everybody it was fake." And I was like, that's a really big red flag for me. So, sure. I mean, I honestly probably should have just, cut the cord right there. But I figured I could probably turn it to my advantage. And I said, okay, well, listen, I want to be the co-writer on the project. And I would like to be on set every day as the historical consultant while you film this, just to make sure that the facts are being presented. And immediately he was like, "Oh, I can't do that. I can't do that." And I'm like, "Why?" And he goes, "Oh, well, these docu-series, they don't have huge budgets. I can't afford to put you up in a hotel on Long Island while we shoot." And I'm like, if you could put the guy that rigs the lights and sets the camera up, in a hotel, you could put the guy that wrote the book you want to adapt in the hotel.
Exactly.
And he's like, "Yeah, but I just can't have you on set fact-checking me every day. This needs to be about my personal journey with the story." And I was like, fuck you.
Oh my God.
Like, yeah. So I immediately cut it off, much to his chagrin. And he went off and did something for Netflix where he unsurprisingly accused another high-profile killer of being the leader of a satanic cult. And it bombed. But anyway, I came to the realization that because he wasn't the only one, I had other people approach me from TV, that were like, "Hey, I do, this fish tank show and Amish Mafia. Can we do a thing about the Ricky Kasso devil cult?" And I'm like, "No." So over the course of 2 years, I came to the realization that if this is ever going to be told properly in documentary form, I'm probably going to have to be the one, calling the shots to make sure that the facts are there. It wasn't a thing of arrogance. It was just, I have all the case files. I interviewed everyone that is still alive that was associated with this case, and I have access to these people for interviews. So I said, you know what? Let's just crowdfund a small budget. I have a lot of friends that know their way around a camera, know how to edit, know how to rig lights, etc. Let's film it ourselves and find a distributor. And over the course of 3 years, that's exactly what we did. And, after all these years of working on it slowly during the pandemic and budgetary problems and technical issues, that the film is finally out for everyone to see. So it's been a long road.
Sure. It's an
And
amazing project.
Well, thank you.
yeah. And where's it going to be? And where's it available at?
There's going to be a larger rollout as the season goes on. Like everything with COVID and everything is still screwing things up. But as of right now, it's on Vudu, DirecTV, FiOS TV, and direct. Did I say DirecTV already? Roku TV. It's going to be on.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, and then Google Play has a page set up for it, but it still says like add to wish list or notify me when available. So it's going to be there sometime, but it's not there yet.
Yeah, it's a rollout then.
Yeah, distribution's a bit of a mess. And then later, either later this year or early next year, there's going to be a DVD and a Blu-ray release from Wild Eye.
Oh, nice. Okay. I'm intrigued at like, what about this particular story kind of drew you to write? I mean, was there something about it specifically that you felt needed to be said?
It was just such a wild story. Like I chose it before I even knew that the media story about it was bullshit.
Okay.
When I was working on my first book, Death on the Devil's Teeth, which was about a similar case that happened in the early 70s, a kind of prototypical satanic panic case. Girl went missing while hitchhiking in Springfield, New Jersey, which is about 2 towns away from where I grew up. And she was found 6 weeks later in the woods. Cops couldn't figure out how she was killed. She was skeletonized by the time they found her. And the press went wild and said she had been sacrificed by either a coven of witches or a satanic cult, depending on what day of the week it was. And there was like 2 weeks worth of very sensational coverage, not just in New Jersey, but like the New York Daily News and the New York Post picked up on it, and a few of the other smaller big city papers across America. So it was kind of well known. And then it quickly burned out. And the case was never solved, but all these rumors of a cult still lasted. So while I was doing the research for that book, I was brushing up on a lot of notable satanic panic cases, just to kind of be familiar with it as a, I don't know, I guess not a movement per se, but a weird anomaly in society. This whole idea of these underground Satan cults are taking your kids. And one name that kept coming up was Ricky Kasso. And I was like, I've never heard of this guy, but man, that photo of him in the AC/DC shirt and growling at the camera, like it was striking. It startled me the first time I saw it. I was like, ooh, there's something up with this kid. And the little bit of information that I could find was just that, oh yeah, he was a good kid gone wrong. He was a football player in middle school. But then one day he smoked a joint and listened to some Ozzy Osbourne records and formed a satanic cult and sacrificed his friend Gary Lauwers to the devil in front of, upwards of 12 to 100 kids. And that, he had led tours to the body, and that he had supposedly engaged in grave robbing. And so I just remember like reading all this cursory stuff, like teenage cult leader, grave robber, tours to a body. Jesus Christ, this story sounds insane. Like, how is this not like a household name among like true crime people?
Yeah.
And I kind of put like a bookmark in it in the back of my head. Like, this would be a really interesting case to visit, even though I knew there was a book about it from the 1980s called Say You Love Satan, but I knew it was out of print. So I was like, well, maybe one day I'll get a chance to do like an updated version of it. And that day came almost immediately after Death on the Devil's Teeth was published in 2015. An editor at Simon & Schuster was having lunch with my agent, Eric Myers. And she said, we're getting ready to launch this true crime line geared towards high schoolers called Something True. And would Jesse be interested in writing a book for it? The only stipulation we have for it is we would like the perpetrator and the victim to both be teenagers, because, they wanted these stories, I guess, to be sort of cautionary tales. And the second he said that to me, I was like, yeah, the Ricky Kasso case. Ricky and Gary were both 17. So I wrote a proposal for the book, a couple sample chapters, and they said, go. That's perfect. And off I ran to write this book. And it was only once I began interviewing people from Northport who had known Ricky and Gary and had lived through this ordeal did I find out that not only was the book Say You Love Satan full of shit, almost all of the newspaper coverage was garbage as well. So what started out as me just wanting to tackle this, rather sensational sounding murder case, but I figured, like an idiot, oh, this will be an easy book. It's an old case. I'll get the case files. I'll re-interview everybody that was associated with it, and I'll give a good modern updated telling of it. And instead it became this, oh my God, there's a mission to be had here. These people had their lives invaded. They, a lot of Ricky and Gary's friends were accused, like by name in these newspapers and on TV, as being in this cult when they weren't.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, well, this is my chance to give them their stories back and correct an ill, if you will. So that's where it became like much more than telling a story. It was, we've got to fix this.
Sure. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible. Now, how long did this take to finish the entire project?
We started the film in November 2017, and then we wrapped on. We did a first cut of it because I had a college reach out to me in the summer of 2019. And the guy that ran the literary department over there, he was from Northport. Like, he grew up while this was happening, and he was just like, hey, I'd love to have an event for you at the school. You could do like a lecture and a book signing and all that. Do you have any like visual materials to go with it too? Like, would you want to do a slideshow or something? And I said, well, I got something better. We're actually working on this documentary about the case. Why don't we do a premiere for it, like an early rough cut of it? And he was like, yeah, that'd be great. So we rented this wonderful theater in Connecticut for the day, and had a lot of people at the premiere. And the audience reaction was astounding. Like, I was like biting my nails the whole time, because it's like, I'm not a professional filmmaker. I had a lot of people with experience helping me, but like, I did not go to film school. And it was overwhelmingly positive, and we had a Q&A session afterwards, and everybody said they loved it. And so, kind of naively, we thought, the film's done, let's put it out. So we put it out on Amazon, and we just got savaged in the reviews. People were like, oh my God, it's too long, it's amateurish, the picture is terrible, yada yada yada. And they were right about a lot of things. So we decided, okay, let's take it down from Amazon and do a proper edit on it and see if we can find a distributor. And that's what we did. We cut about a half hour from it. It's weird. We cut stuff from it, but we filmed new stuff for it too. Like, a bunch of people came forward after they heard about the first cut of the documentary and were like, hey, I knew Ricky and Gary. I know I'm too late to be in the movie, but anytime you want to talk about stuff, reach out. And I'm like, well, actually, let's get you on camera. We're doing a new cut for it. So we got half a dozen new interviews in the film. We completely re-edited it. We made it tighter, and it just became a much better film. And we sent it over to Wild Eye Releasing on the advice of our friend, Chris Boucher. And luckily, Rob over at Wild Eye, he was already familiar with the Kasso case. He was familiar with a lot of the filmmakers we interview in the film, people like Jim Van Beber. And he was like, yeah, dude, this is great. Let's go with it. So he signed us, and we got the film ready. We did a bunch of work on the promotional materials for it. We did work on special features that are going to be on the Blu-ray. And we had the first VOD rollout of it in early November.
That's amazing.
Awesome. Yeah.
That's so cool. Cool. Congratulations, man.
Thanks. It's been a long, weird road, but I'm happy it's finally out.
And then how's the book progressing?
Well, the book came. That's the funny thing. The book came out. I started work on the book in 2015, and then the book came out in October 2018. But we started on the film a year earlier, so there was like an overlap of a year where I was working on both of them.
Oh, so crazy.
Yeah, the book luckily came out before all of the delays we had with COVID, but it kind of served as like this helping thing towards us, because people that read the book could be like, oh, there's a documentary now, cool. So they're kind of like, while the documentary isn't like a note for note adaptation of the book, it's kind of like a companion piece to it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it worked out.
Well, we have a note here, but something about I know that you are interested in a lot of paranormal investigations, and like I love the paranormal, so I'm just love to talk a little about that.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, I
grew up in a haunted house.
saw. Yeah, exactly. I saw somewhere that you ran your own investigation somewhere, or I don't know if you've done multiple.
Oh yeah. I'm not like, I don't have like an official ghost hunting team or anything, but back when we started podcast 1289, which is where the 1289 and 1289 films comes from, all the people that worked on this film, well, not all of them, but like all of the people from podcast 1289 worked on the Acid King, the film. So we're just like, why don't we just call the company 1289 Films? It'll be an extension of the podcast. And one of the first things we did, even before we started work on the Acid King, was we went on a road trip together, because we're spread out all over the country, but most of us grew up in New Jersey. And so like some of us are out in the Midwest, and then Dan's in Texas. And we said, okay, why don't like all of us that are outside of New Jersey, let's meet up in Ohio at the airport, and then we'll drive from there to the East Coast and stop at these haunted places on the way back home, and we'll film it.
Ooh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It was such a goofy little thing. And it looks like shit, to be honest, because we got it in our heads. We're like, why don't we film it on like an actual camcorder so it looks like the Blair Witch Project? And like that was cool to us, but like other people are like, why the fuck is this filmed on a camcorder in 2017?
Yeah.
And I don't know. It was the aesthetic, man. But yeah, so we stopped at like Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and we filmed us at the at John F. Kennedy's Air Force One, because we're like, well, that's spooky. His body was in there, I guess. And then the next stop was what led to a bunch of stuff with the show. We stopped in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, where the Mothman sightings happened.
Oh wow.
And we had it, in our head that was like, oh, well, we'll just go to the locations where the Mothman was seen, like the TNT area and stuff. And when we were looking for a hotel to stay at, we're like, oh, there's only one hotel in Point Pleasant. It's called the Low Hotel. Let's Google and see what this place is like. And then we found out, oh, it's built in 1901 and it's fucking haunted. So we're like, we hit pay dirt, boys. So we decided to spend the night. We got this great twofer. At one point during the night, we're doing this investigation of the TNT area where the Mothman was seen, and then we get to come back and sleep in this haunted hotel. And so we were doing like EVP sessions in there, and shit just got so crazy there that we said, we have to come back here sometime with the whole crew, because it was just the first half of it, going to meet everybody on the East Coast. And so this past summer, back when COVID was kind of dying down a bit and everybody got vaccinated, we went back there to film in HD this time. No more camcorder shit. But we got a lot more access to the hotel. Like they let us go up to the ballroom on the 4th floor, and we got a whole bunch of spirit box activity. I don't know. I won't give away too much because it's all going to be in this film that we're editing together, and there's some clips on YouTube from it right now. But it is definitely, the Low Hotel in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, is definitely one of the most, if not the most haunted places that I've ever been in. And I got my start writing for Weird New Jersey magazine, so like I've always been a big paranormal guy, even before true crime. So to be able to stay in this hotel, which, if you're not in town during the Mothman Festival, it's dead. So we were the only people there. So it was like being in The Shining. It was awesome.
There's a Mothman Festival? That's crazy to think.
Every September, except for, the past 2 years because of COVID. But yeah, it's like the town's bread and butter.
Andy, let's go there and record.
Yeah, we should.
That would be amazing.
I'm going to tell you this right now, though. If you want to stay in the Haunted Low Hotel, book a room like the April before. So,
Yeah.
like for 2022, if you want to do it in September 2022 when they have it, book it in April 2022 because it fills up fast. Otherwise, you're going to have to go stay across the river at a Motel 6 in like Ohio or something. But this place is crazy. It has not been updated in years, and I don't mean that in like a bad way. It's like staying in an old boutique hotel, and it is very haunted.
That's awesome.
That is
I'm gonna look into that
awesome.
because that sounds kind of fun and creepy and entertaining, and so many things all at once.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
If you're like a writer, and you're already interested in that stuff, just to be in that headspace of I'm chilling in a haunted hotel where a winged cryptid terrorized the shit out of people, and right out the window is where the Silver Bridge used to be before it collapsed, and everybody blamed it on the Mothman. Like I said, it's like being in The Shining. It's an otherworldly experience. Not to be too cheesy about it.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, it sounds eerie. Sounds nice. Have you, besides any of your filming with it, have you ever had personal experiences with ghosts or spirits or paranormal activity?
Oh yeah, just about every house I've lived in was a haunted house. I mean, with the area that I grew up in New Jersey, Union County, has like a lot of rich history with the Revolutionary War and stuff. So like even going back to when I was a little kid, I was always going to like these battlefields or like in that first film we did with the camcorders for podcast 1289. It's on YouTube for free. It's called Homecoming. There is a tavern that is right in the town that I was born and raised in, Rahway, New Jersey, and it's called Merchants and Drovers Tavern, and it was built sometime in the 1700s, and it was one of those places where it's George Washington slept here, so that was like their claim to fame, and they would have ghost nights when I was a kid, and it was the coolest shit in the world because they would have you come and they'd have a tour guide lead you through this, centuries old building, and they would have actors in the rooms, like dressed up as like Revolutionary War soldiers or as ghosts and stuff. So there was always the specter of that hanging around. But a couple places that my family later moved into, like one house we lived in Rahway, there was a lot of paranormal activity. There was footsteps that we would hear in the hallway of the second floor on almost a nightly basis. They would just pace for fucking hours. And one time my kid's sister opened the door and she swears that she saw a silhouette of a man in a top hat standing there. Another time my kid's sister went into the basement and she said she saw a little boy's head sitting on a shelf grinning at her. And then another time she saw the whole apparition and said it was a little boy in old clothes. And she was like 3 when this happened.
Yeah.
And we really didn't think anything of it at the time until we were going through some newspapers in the basement of this house. And we pulled out this, it was in a box. It was this old copy of a newspaper from like the 1890s or the early 1900s. And apparently a man had murdered his son in the bathroom of our house that was, at the end of the hallway where we were constantly hearing the footsteps, and my sisters saw the guy in the top hat.
Oh, shit.
And the article said that this man had drowned his son in the bathtub, and they had a drawing of the guy, and it was a dude in a top hat.
Oh my God.
And it had a drawing of a little boy. So assuming my sisters, I mean, I have no reason to think they were full of shit because I heard the footsteps myself.
Well, at that age, she's just talking like, "Oh, I just see a boy." Like she doesn't even think about it. I would think, right?
Yeah.
Like
she ran down the basement because my stepfather was working on things down there at the time. He was working on, refurbishing the house, and he had gone upstairs to go to the bathroom or something, and he left the door because the door to the basement was in the kitchen, and he'd left it open. She wandered down there looking for him, and she said, "Oh, this happened twice. The first time she said it was a little boy's head sitting on a shelf, and he was smiling at me." And then the second time she went down there and he was standing there and she was like, "It was a boy in old clothes, Mom." And so like that terrified the shit out of me because I heard about this later. I was in high school at the time this happened. So like, I was only like home on the weekends, like I was doing, ratchety teenage shit. I was playing in a band at the time. So like, second I got off the school bus, I was off fucking around with something else, and then I'd come home on the weekends and you're like, oh yeah, your sister's seeing decapitated ghost boys in the basement. I'm like, nice. That's great. Pass the food, please.
Yeah.
And then later we found out even crazier. Once all this shit started happening in the house, my mom asked the landlord, because we were renting the place, like, what is the history of this house? And we found out that there used to be an old German cemetery on the grounds that the back half of the house fell on. At some point, they had moved all the bodies elsewhere when they had developed this neighborhood into a neighborhood. And I mean, it's like shit out of Poltergeist, but that came straight from the historical society. They're like, oh yeah, it was an old German cemetery, but it's okay. They moved all the bodies, and it's like, well, they didn't move the ghosts. So
yeah, and that's probably why there are ghosts, is because they messed with the graves.
Yeah. Something was disturbed there, and oh my god, I'll never forget this one time there. This house actually scared the shit out of me. Other places I've lived in with like hauntings in it were usually pretty benign. It would just be like, oh, I saw like a shadow, or I heard a footstep or a knock somewhere. One time, I mentioned I was in a band at the time. One of the weekends that I was home, the lead singer in my band, my friend Kyle, he decided to spend the night. Usually we crashed at his place because we could smoke weed there and play music really loud. I couldn't get away with that at home. But for whatever reason, he decided like, oh yeah, I'll come over this weekend. We'll work on some songs together. And we stayed up till like 2 a.m. writing songs, and we just decided to crash on the 2 couches that were in the living room. And I'll never forget, he woke me up at some ungodly hour of the morning, and he's just going, Jesse. And even before he could tell me what was happening, I could fucking hear it, because the way that the house was laid out was in the front of the house, you had the living room, and then the living room, it was almost like a shotgun shack layout. You had the living room, which led straight into the dining room, and the dining room led straight back into the kitchen where the door to the basement was. And I could hear 20 feet away all of the cabinets and drawers in the kitchen opening on their own, slamming, opening and closing. And there was a lock, like a chain lock on the basement door. And it sounded like someone was in the basement behind that door, clenching the knob to the door and just going like this, like trying to jerk it open.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was so terrified of it that I basically told Kyle, I was like, Kyle, my house is haunted. Just go back to sleep. And I laid there and hoped it would go away. But that was the other big time. Like, I never saw anything there, any full apparitions. But between the footsteps that would pace, like I said, for hours, and that shit that happened in the kitchen, I believed everything that my mom and my sisters were telling me about that place. It was pretty scary.
The house I grew up in was haunted too.
Well, let's hear about it. I want to hear.
I mean, it's nothing like that. And I was so young when we were at that house, and for years, I've told this story so many times, and people laugh, but it's like the dumbest story. But we were probably, I don't know, we were pre-pubescence. It was like right before we were in our teenage years. And I remember that we'd found I'm sorry, Dad, for saying this. We found my father's nudie magazines, because you're a kid and you're like, and so, and so my cousin was over, and the house was designed where like we had a long hallway that ended at a bathroom as well. That to this day haunts me. And I remember. So I have a twin sister, and we would sleep in the same room. And then as I got older, I wanted my own room. So there was another bedroom across from my parents, and I took over that room. And I just remember that room always being so cold. Like, it didn't matter what time of year. I could just never, ever warm up in that room. And I was a skinny kid too, so I just assumed I just was underweight. But like, I'd have blankets. I was freezing. And I also remember, for some reason, I as a kid, I always slept with the door open because my parents were there, but I never wanted the door closed. I didn't know why. And I could never, and to this day, I still can't do this, but for some reason, I could never, ever sleep facing the wall. I always had to have my back facing the wall so I could feel.
Yeah, I hate that shit too.
Yeah. So, but I just remember for some weird reason, like always just being like, I just had this weird feeling. Okay. But, and I would always have really, really bad dreams about a guy in the garage. And I remember for some reason, it was just like, and I remember my sister and I equate these things because everything was dark, but I remember my sister and I always being afraid of the garage. Like during the day, it was fine. We'd play in there, but at night, we're like, we're good. So flash forward now, my mother, my father, my aunt, and my uncle are in the living room, right? And from the living room, you go down the hall and make a small right into my parents' room, right? So there's no way you could get to it except going down the hallway where we were already at. And I just remember we're like, we tell my cousin, we're like, oh my God, look at, because we're kids and we're curious about the body and stuff. And it's, I think at that time we were probably had just learned sex ed, so we're still kind of curious. Yeah. And as we're like sitting there laughing and giggling and being nerdy little kids, we hear this voice from the bathroom that just said, "Get out." Deep.
Oh, fuck that. They make movies about that shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Damn sequel. You don't have to tell me twice. Goodbye.
And people are like, oh, it's probably like your uncle and whatever. We're like, no, because when we were so terrified. I mean, just those two words, get out. Deep, manly voice. And we ran out into the living room and everybody was there. And we were like, like, what are you talking about? You guys, you're kids. And we're like, we're sorry. We found your magazines. So, but then from my parents for years would always like, we don't know. You don't know what you're talking about. Like it never happened, blah, blah, blah. And then I remember years later when I was in my early 20s, my sister did like a 3-way call with our old neighbor. And they would sit there. And when I was a kid, we would go camping every month. We belonged to like this camping club. For like one weekend a month, we would go camping. And our neighbor was telling us, she's like, the shit that would happen to your house while you were gone. She's like, lights would just come on and off constantly. And I was like, no. I said, no, we had our lights on timer as a, so that way they had these little box timers. I don't know if you remember but like,
oh yeah.
Yeah, they had these box timers. And so like every night at like 6 o'clock, you could have your light pop on for a couple hours to make it look like people were home. And we had that in the living room. It was only in the living room we had that. And she's like, oh no. She's like, your bedroom light would just flash. Like someone was sitting there flashing the light. And she's like in the garage. And she's like in your parents' bedroom. And I was like, oh yeah. Like, and she said, because after we moved out, the family that moved in would sit there and tell us stuff that would happen. So I remember specifically, I was probably in my 30s, early 30s too. And I had taken a trip to New York with my father and I was hanging out with my family. We're having this bonfire and we're all sitting there having a couple drinks and we're kind of just selling little silly stories about stuff that happened. And out of the fucking blue, my dad goes, oh, I think the house you were in was haunted. I was like, God damn it, Dad. I said, I've been asking you for years and you were just saying it. He goes, oh no. And so he started telling me things like, he goes, oh yeah. He goes, weird shit would happen. He goes, doors would just open without anything. And he goes, he said one time, he told the story. I wish I could ever remember it. I'd have to ask him. But he said he took his shoes off from work and he like threw them on the floor. But it's like someone else, like it was like they got picked up and thrown. Or just stuff like that. Like,
yeah.
And I was like, Dad, for 15 years, you acted like we were like made up all these stories and the entire time. Now, I never asked him if you heard any talking. I never heard him. I heard that once. It only took once. It was the most terrifying thing I'd ever... Because it was a voice I didn't recognize. It came out of nowhere. And it came from my parents' bathroom, so it echoed, right?
Sure.
It, dude, terrified me. And to this day, I'm still afraid of the dark. I can't do it. Which is weird because I love horror movies, but it's because I believe in that shit. Like, that shit's real, bro.
Yeah, I'm a huge horror movie nut. But, I mean, like, the real life shit is always more compelling. And, like, it has its own flavor. Like, like, when you hear like a story like yours and stuff, like, other than like, oh, we heard Get Out in a haunted house, like that evokes like Amityville, but like other stuff, it's like, well, no, like horror stuff in real life is much more mundane with stuff like that.
Yeah.
You're not going to see like all like when people start talking about and then I saw like levitate and come to attack me, or an apparition was choking me. I get a little more hesitant with stuff like that, but then again, like. The craziest thing that ever happened to me as far as like seeing an apparition went, and this is one of the few times I actually have seen something. Like in the past, it's always been like I've heard something, whether it's the cabinet doors opening, or someone trying to open the basement door, or, if there's anyone here, can you give us a knock? And then we'll hear a knock back. But the big thing for me was, and this is another story with Kyle. How the hell old was I? I must have been only about 15 when this happened. So this is back in 2003. So there was no, I don't even think Google was around back then. There was probably like InfoSeek and Ask Jeeves, but like there was no social media beyond like, I don't know, like Live Journal or some shit. So like the internet, it was not a time where if something happened, you could immediately go and Google it and figure shit out. But either way, there was this one night where we used to, it's kind of stupid and irresponsible now looking back, but we used to just drive around smoking weed all the fucking time on the weekends because we were in a band and we thought this is what bands do. Because like every Beatles documentary we would watch would be like, so me and John was smoking weed and wrote Sgt. Pepper. And it's like, that's the key. We have to smoke weed and then we will write our own Sgt. Pepper. Like, forget the talent part. We were just like, we just need drugs. So we would drive around. And again, a preface for this story, this area of Union County, like throw a stone, you'll hit a fucking historical battlefield. So everything in this area was kind of like named after George Washington or named after some part of the war. And we pulled over at this place called Galloping Hill Golf Course. And I didn't play golf when I was 15. So Galloping Hill, I just always figured like, oh, okay, well, there were either horse stables there at some point, or there was something that had to do with the Revolutionary War. But Kyle and our drummer, Eric, they wanted to get out and go into the woods bordering Galloping Hill Golf Course. And, so like the golf course is in the center. To the left of that center is the woods. And then to the right of that center is this neighborhood street, and we're parked there in front of someone's house, which again, I thought was, kind of stupid, especially now in retrospect. But he was like, come on, we just smoked. Let's go for a night walk in the woods. It'll be fun. He was into hiking and shit. And I was spooked by it. I was like, no, we're going to run into cops or some shit. I'm going to stay here. Like, I just had a really bad feeling about it. And instead of saying, oh, okay, well, let's just go home then, Kyle and Eric said, okay, well, you can sit here if you want to be, a wimp about it. We're going to go for a walk.
Of course.
Like, okay. So I'm sitting there and like a half hour goes by. And I'm like, are these fucking guys coming back or what? So I look out the window, and the way that these woods were laid out against the golf course was, it was a flat plateau of an area. Then it went up into like a slope. And at the top of the slope were the trees. So I'm looking at the tree line because that's where they went in. And I just see this thing almost as soon as I start looking out the window towards it. I see this silhouetted figure come out from between two trees at the tree line. And it's like when you see someone walking, you kind of see their head bobbing up and down because, your spine is a shock absorber. This fucking floated out.
Oh, shit.
And I'm looking, it was just a shape at this point, but it was completely black. And I see this thing, it just floats out between these two trees down the hill and then comes down to the flat plateau area of the golf course. And it's going, slowly across like that. And I'm looking at it, and it's like from here down to about its feet, but it just trailed, it evaporated out. You didn't see any feet. But then like I was so struck by like, where the fuck are the feet on this thing? And why is it floating? That I didn't notice it was missing its head.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And it was not like the classic headless horseman where, you see like a neck stump or, like the
severed mark
of a yeah. It was just from the shoulders across, nothing. Just completely flat here. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, am I really seeing a headless ghost at a place called Galloping Hill Golf Course? Like, this is a little too Washington Irving for me. Now, granted, I did not see a horse or anything or a fucking flaming jack-o'-lantern, but I'm like, there is a black figure floating across the fucking grass right now with no head. And like I said, it floated out like maybe 20, 30 feet and then just evaporated. And I'm like, what the fuck did I just see? And then from the same spot that I saw this thing walk out from, I see Kyle and Eric running out, like darting out from between the trees. They run down the same slope and then they head right to the car, like running, booking it. And they open the car doors. I'm sitting in the back seat. Before I can open my fucking mouth, it's like I wasn't even there. Kyle and Eric are yelling at each other, like, get in, get in, get in. And then I hear Eric say to Kyle, he goes, did you see it? It didn't have a fucking head. It had no head, Kyle. And I'm like, you saw it too? And they're like, you saw it? And I'm like, it came out of the woods right before you. And they're like, before us? And I'm like, yeah, why? And they said to me that, if I'm remembering this correctly, because like I said, this is going back 18 years at this point, they were going down this long trail in the woods and they saw like a glowing light in the distance. So they kept walking towards it. Like Kyle was afraid someone had lit a forest fire by accident. Like I said, he was into hiking in nature and smoking weed and shit. So as they were moving closer to this glowing light in the distance, they saw this figure. And they said by the time, well, not by the time, I'm not implying like it was a long amount of time, but they said, you know, once it registered, like, holy shit, that's a person standing there and they're missing their head. They said it turned around and started coming towards them. So they said, they told me, they were like, we were running away from it. How did it get out of the woods before us? And I'm like, I don't know, but I saw it. And I was like, you know, it was just a black mass. I could see shoulders, but no head, legs, but no feet. And
that is incredible.
We never went back there. And I would think about it occasionally, but like so many other shit happened around that same time, including the stuff that happened at my house with my sisters, that I didn't think about it a lot. But fast forward to about 2015, like I had mentioned earlier, I write for Weird New Jersey magazine, which covers like a lot of local legends, ghost sightings, UFO shit. And I came aboard around 2001. Like I was 15 years old writing in, you know, weird ghost sighting shit from when I was a kid. And by this time in 2015, I was like, let me complete the collection of the issues. The magazine started when I was a little kid. I was born in 1988 and the magazine came out in 94. So yeah, I was 6. So I didn't have like the first 5 or 10 issues of this magazine. So I went and I bought them off of eBay. And in like issue number 3, which again came out in like the mid 90s when I was a kid, I was not reading Weird New Jersey at this time. I did not have this issue until years after this incident at Galloping Hill. I'm flipping through this issue of Weird New Jersey, and then there's this tiny little article like this big on the page. And it was some guy wrote in a letter talking about like, has anyone seen the headless ghost over by the woods near Galloping Hill Golf Course?
Oh my gosh.
And my fucking jaw dropped. I was like, holy shit, someone else saw this thing a decade before we saw it. I don't know if anyone else other than us and this guy that happened to write this letter has seen it, but someone else had definitely seen this thing, like I said, a decade before we even did. So that scared the shit out of me. Because, you know, as time goes on, when you experience things like, especially things you've seen, you know, like apparition eyes, it's like, well, were my eyes playing tricks on me? It was dark. We were smoking pot. You know, it could have been a mass hallucination. You know, your mind, like, if you have a rational mind, tries to like talk you out of it almost. But here was another person, a person to this day I've never met, who wrote that article for the magazine that said they saw it too when I was, you know, in grade school, years before my own sighting happened. So yeah, that always freaked me the hell out.
That is wow. Sounds like a nice. You have an idea for a nice paranormal documentary now. I love it.
I would love to shoot something like that. Like I said, like I've been talking about Kasso for all these years, and I am happy that the film is out. But like, as I'm sure your listeners and your viewers can tell by now, if they haven't turned this off because my voice is so grating, I love. We should do this again sometime, either on this show where you guys come over on podcast 1289. I could talk about like personal ghost stories all fucking day. Like, I love that shit.
Sure.
Well, we'd love to be on the show. That'd be great.
Yeah, no, anytime. Once we get done with this, we'll set it up, because we definitely love having people on that have, like I said, we normally, like, we ridicule like the most bizarre shit we find, but we like to mix it up and have people come on the show that have actually seen shit to,
Oh, I have. This is just one of many stories I have. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you guys gotta come on, because that's like a big passion for me, because once you've seen shit like that and your family has seen it too, like, it's hard to not be a believer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's always funny in horror movies where there's, you'll have like a husband and a wife that both experience, but one of them is always like, maybe there's a reason for it, it's just blah, blah, blah. And you're like, no, we literally saw the exact same thing. This, quote unquote, headless goat. Like, there's there's got to be reason. There's always got to be that one that has like the reasoning. And I know that's like storytelling, but it's always interesting because, like you say, when you see it in person, you're like, maybe there's some truth. Like, there's got to be something about it.
Oh yeah. No, and my parents, they were believers too, because they would see shit like my folks would give me like again before so my phone gave me an alert my battery's actually dying, so I'll wrap this up really quick for you guys. Okay. But like my parents would give me, like, before MapQuest and Google Maps or even Waze, like, they'd write down a map on a napkin and be like, oh yeah, go to Perth Amboy and go to this cemetery. We've seen shit like, they call them the guardians of this one cemetery at Perth Amboy, which is about a half hour away from where I grew up, and it's where my dad grew up. And I've seen people writing about this in a multitude of places, and my parents saw this for themselves. There are 3 hooded figures that, if you're driving past the cemetery at a specific time at night, they will be standing at the gates. But once you pass them and you look behind you, they're gone.
Oh God.
And yeah, and so we're like, we got to go check out these cemeteries. So me and Bob and Mike, who are also on podcast 1289, this was before we even started the show, we went to ghost hunt at one of these cemeteries, and it was creepy shit. We would go to like the mausoleums and be like, we would stand out with digital recorder only a few feet away from the mausoleum and go, if there's someone here that wants to communicate with us, knock once for yes. And we would hear someone knock inside the fucking mausoleum. And it was unmistakable. It was an old steel door. And we'd be like, okay, time to leave now.
Yeah, time to go.
One night we were on our way out, because we went 2 or 3 different times just to kind of be like, okay, well, let's go again to make sure that wasn't a fluke. The last time we went there, and this was about 10 years ago, we're walking out, and I am still so mad at myself for turning off the camera when this happened. But at the end, we said, if there's anyone that would like to say anything else before we leave, please do so now. And we waited about a minute, and we heard nothing. And we're like, okay, well, maybe there's an EVP waiting for us on the footage, but either way, they're not doing anything right now. So, pack it up. Let's go home. We turn the cameras off. The second we turn the cameras off, from the back of the cemetery, we hear like the most eerie death rattling moan I've ever heard. It sounded like a very old man. It was, I'm going to try my best to do it. It was something like you could hear like the rattle in the back of the throat. And it's echoing throughout this. This is Alpine Cemetery in Perth Amboy, if any Jersey listeners are tuning in. This place is huge, and it's echoing off of all the headstones and all this shit. It's like, God. 2 in the morning. And we hear this, and my knees, like, how when you feel true fear, like your knees begin to wobble?
Yeah.
My knees turn to fucking jello when we heard this. And I'm fumbling with the camera. I'm trying to turn it back on to catch it. And as soon as the cameras went back on, it stopped. And it was like, all right, fuck it. This thing, like, doesn't want us here. It doesn't want to be some carnival sideshow by us recording it. Let's get the fuck out of here. And we left. And the eeriest thing about where we heard that scream coming from, and this is where I'll leave you guys, was we later remembered, hey, that back part of the cemetery where we heard that moan, scream, groan, whatever you want to call it, was coming from. Wasn't that the tuberculosis graves? It was the back part of the cemetery where all of the kids in the 20s died of tuberculosis in that area. It was children. Yeah. So that like added like this extra wave of sadness and tragedy to it. And we just said, you know what? We pissed them off. Let's not disturb them again. So that was one of the few places where we're like, we're not going back. You know, I could very easily go, you know, with the guys again and film something there with a full camera crew now that we know more about it. You know, it's much easier than like breaking into an abandoned place or something like that. But I got the hint the first time. So I think we're going to look for something to film elsewhere.
Yeah, without a
It's
doubt.
probably a good idea.
Wow, so many great stories. I cannot wait to be on your show and find out more. But where can our audience find you?
Well, when I'm not, you know, roaming around spooky cemeteries in New Jersey, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at J Pollack Author. That's JPOLLACK Author. And you can follow the podcasts that I co-host at the first one is podcast 1289. That's 1289. And if you want to hear the same group of ghouls from podcast 1289 reviewing shitty true crime movies, we have a little side project called True Crime Movie Club. So if you want to hear us talking about really awful direct-to-video Ted Bundy movies and making fun of them, definitely check that show out.
Yeah, definitely will.
Yeah, dude, thank you so much for hanging with us today. This was wow. One of my most favorite things to talk about is paranormal. So thank you.
Yeah, no, let's do it again, either my show or yours. I'm happy to talk about this for hours, and next time I'll make sure my phone is charged more.
Well, I appreciate it. Anything else, Andy, you want to say? Since we're
no. I mean, this has been great. Listening to your story has been amazing. I guess real quick, if I could throw this in, it's kind of off topic, but I hear you're a fan of the famous Carvel Cookie Puss, and I wanted to get your thoughts on the Cookie Puss.
Oh my god!
Because I personally, I grew up on the West Side. I've never on the West Coast. I've never had one, but a buddy of mine who's from New York, we tried to make one time, and it came out horrible. I wish I had a picture of it to show you, but
so it was accurate then, because Cookie Puss is an abomination. It's proof that there's no God.
Yeah, correct. Exactly.
Like Fudgy the whale is okay. Like he's whale shaped and he's made ostensibly of fudge, so we can fuck Fudgy. Cookie Puss is, for those of you who aren't listening, on the East, I'm sorry, for those of you who are listening who aren't from New Jersey, on the East Coast, there's an ice cream company called Carvel that was founded by this guy, Tom Carvel. And throughout, I think this shit started in the late 70s. The Beastie Boys' first single was about this shit.
It was.
This fucking Frankenstein abomination called Cookie Puss. And it's, I don't even know how you describe it. It looks like an upside down like ice cream cone, and it's got ice cream sandwiches for eyes, and it looks nothing like a cookie, and it looks nothing like an octopus. But they also say he's an alien from space, which is not a good incentive to eat something. When in the commercials, just like, he's from outer space, it's Cookie Puss, and it's like, get this fucking thing away from me. So Cookie Puss has always been like this, like, well, only in New Jersey. Like, you know, like we can't even get fucking ice cream for kids right. It's like this horrible Lovecraftian fucking beast of like the eldritch mythos, Cookie Puss.
Yeah.
I
love that.
Like, I've always found that funny. I always try to get a Cookie Puss joke in on the show if I can. We tried to convince, because I live out in Ohio now, but Mike, who's on podcast 1289 and True Crime Movie Club, he's still out in Jersey. And when we filmed in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, I told him, bring a fucking Cookie Puss, get some dry ice or something. And he's like, I'm not bringing a fucking Cookie Puss in my car. And I'm like, do it. And he did it. So now we can't be friends anymore. But yeah, one day we'll get a Cookie Puss.
Well, I look forward to this Cookie Puss.
Dude, Google him when you get off the show. He's a fucking.
I'm going to.
Yeah, it is. It's an abomination for sure.
Well, that's a good way to end the show. Then I love it.
Listeners, go Google a picture of Cookie Puss and leave a comment on the Hanging with Mike and Andy social media saying what you think Cookie Puss looks like, because he is not an octopus made out of cookies or a cookie made out of octopuses. I don't know. Write in, tell us what to do. But yeah, Cookie Puss.
Cookie Puss. Good old Cookie Puss.
Yeah, good old Cookie. Well, anyways, this was a fun ass episode. So thank you so much for hanging with us today, man.
Yeah, thanks.
And good luck with the movie.
Say what?
And good luck with the movie and your book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, it's like I said, I'm happy to talk about them, but any chance we get to talk about the paranormal or Cookie Puss, it's a great day. There's more levity to that than satanic murder that the press got even worse. So
well, so many things we covered today. But then in closing, I'll just say, everybody, thank you so much for listening to the show, and thank you to our guest, Jesse Pollack, for being on today and talking about all of his new stuff. And Andy, any closing thoughts before you leave?
No. I think we've covered everything. As long as we threw in the Cookie Puss, I was very interested about your thoughts on that.
To be continued. We'll talk about Cookie Puss more in the future. Especially, I really hope your viewers and listeners do chime in about that on social media, because I would love for us to sit down and read their thoughts on Cookie Puss, especially if they've never seen this creature before.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll compile those for you. Anyways, you can find the show on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, wherever. Also, you can watch this awesome video on YouTube. But again, this is Michael Colomb.
And this is Andrew Giarusso.
And you are hanging with Mike and Andy.